The telephone has a different scream these days. It's not the shrill, mechanical bell of my youth, a sound that demanded immediate attention, that spoke of urgency or news from afar. No, the ringtone now is a polite, digitized melody, a soft chime that more often than not heralds an intrusion, a piece of noise disguised as communication. I've learned to distrust it. At 78 years old, distrust is a suit of armor I've tailored for myself, stitch by careful stitch, over a lifetime of observing the ways the world can wear you down. I was in the garage when it rang, my sanctuary. The air was thick with the holy scents of sawdust, machine oil, and the rich, loamy smell of peat from the seedling trays I was starting for the spring. My hands, speckled with the constellations of age, were steady for once, guiding a tiny drill bit into a piece of cherry wood. I was building a nesting box for the bluebirds that return to the oak in my backyard every year. A small, pointless project, the kind that gives a man a reason to get out of bed. The phone chirped from its cradle on the workbench, shattering my focus. A tiny tremor, the ghost of a shake that comes and goes as it pleases, danced through my fingers. I sighed, setting the drill down. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, a string of digits with an area code I didn't recognize. A 742. Where the hell was that? Some digital nowhere, a non-place where these calls originate. My first instinct, as always, was to let it go to voicemail. But a second, more stubborn instinct, born of 6 decades as an engineer, a problem solver, made me pick it up. A data point. I was always collecting data points. "Hello?" I said, my voice a gravelly approximation of its former self. There was a hitched breath on the other end, a wet, shuddering sound. Then a young voice, choked with tears. "Grandpa? It's me." The voice was generic, young, male, laced with panic. I have 3 grandsons. Michael, with his easy laugh, is in Tokyo working for a finance firm. Christopher is a marine biologist in Monterey, his voice permanently sun-bleached and calm. And then there's Daniel, the youngest, a musician in Austin, who calls me every Sunday without fail. His conversation's a meandering river of guitar chords and dreams. This wasn't any of them. The timbre was wrong, the cadence foreign. But the performance was convincing. The raw, undirected fear was a tool, and the person on the other end of the line knew how to wield it. A cold stone settled in my gut. This was it. The scam I read about in the AARP bulletins. The one my friend Herbert fell for last year, losing $5,000 and a large piece of his pride. They'd preyed on his love, his fear for his family. They'd turned his greatest strength, his devotion, into a devastating weakness. "Who is this?" I asked, deliberately letting a quaver enter my voice. I leaned into my age, let it become a cloak. "I can't hear you too well, son. You'll have to speak up." "It's me, Grandpa," the voice pleaded, a fresh wave of sobs shaking the words. "I'm in so much trouble. I was at a party. I got arrested. They're saying I have a DUI. I'm so sorry." I closed my eyes. I pictured Daniel. What if it was him? The thought, though irrational, sent a lance of genuine fear through me. That was their genius. They tapped into the primal well of a grandparent's love, muddying the waters of logic with the pure, sharp toxin of worry. I had to play along. I had to know. "Oh, dear Lord," I whispered, making my breath hitch. "Are you hurt? Are you all right?" "I'm okay. I'm in jail. They said I need bail money to get out. They said it's $4,000. I'm so embarrassed. I didn't know who else to call.
Please don't tell Mom and Dad." The calculus was simple, brutal. They assumed I was alone. They assumed I was scared. They assumed my mind was as soft as my spine was brittle. They were wrong on all counts but the last one. My body was a traitorous old house, its foundations shifting, its pipes groaning, but the occupant, the essential me, was still there, watching from a window, clear-eyed and calm. Before I could respond, the line was taken over. The background noise shifted, the faint echo of a busy room, manufactured, I suspected, replaced the intimate panic. A new voice, deeper, authoritative, devoid of emotion, came on the line. "Sir, this is Sergeant Miller with the County Sheriff's Department. I have your grandson here. He's been processed, but we need to get this bail situation resolved. He's very shaken up." Sergeant Miller, a name as faint as the concern in his voice. I could hear the cheap headset he was wearing, the faint plastic squeak as he shifted. An engineer learns to listen to the system, not just the words. The system here was cheap, hastily assembled, full of friction and noise. "Oh my," I breathed, injecting a healthy dose of confusion. $4,000? I don't have that kind of money here. I'd have to go to the bank." "That's fine, sir," the false sergeant said, his tone shifting to one of patronizing reassurance. "A wire transfer is the fastest way. It's what we recommend in these situations to get your grandson released as quickly as possible. I'm going to give you the routing and account number for the court's holding fund. Do you have a pen?"
I fumbled loudly on the workbench, knocking a screwdriver to the concrete floor. The sound was perfect. A clatter of geriatric incompetence. Just a moment, just a moment. All right. Yes, I'm ready." I picked up a grease pencil, my hand now perfectly steady. He recited the numbers, a bank, an account number. I wrote them slowly, carefully on the smooth surface of the workbench, my script deliberately large and wavering. I repeated them back to him, transposing 2 digits, forcing him to correct me with a sigh of poorly veiled impatience. "You need to go to your bank and have them send the funds to this account," he instructed. "We'll hold him here until the transfer clears. We'll call you back in 1 hour to confirm. Do you understand, sir?" Yes, I'll go right now. Please take care of my boy." "He's in good hands," the voice said, and the line went dead. The silence in the garage was absolute, broken only by the hum of the freezer and the frantic thumping of my own heart. The cold stone in my gut had been replaced with a hot, sharp coal of anger. It was one thing to steal from a corporation, from a faceless entity. It was another thing entirely to steal from the elderly, to weaponize our love for our families, to strip us not just of money, but of dignity and peace of mind. Herbert hadn't just lost money. He'd lost a piece of his trust in the world. He'd become quieter, more withdrawn, a little more broken. I looked at the numbers scrawled on the bench. This wasn't a problem of sentiment. It was a problem of systems. They had a system for exploitation. It was time to build a better one for retribution. I didn't call my son. I didn't call my grandsons. I picked up the phone again and dialed a number I never thought I'd need. The non-emergency line for the local police department. I was connected to an Officer Dunn, a woman whose voice sounded young, tired, and skeptical. "I'd like to report an attempted fraud," I said, my voice now stripped of its quaver. all business. "All right, sir," she said, and I could hear the click of a keyboard. "Are you certain? These grandparent scams are very common." "I am certain," I said. "I have the phone number they called from, the bank routing number, and the account number they instructed me to wire $4,000 to." The clicking stopped. There was a beat of silence. "You have the account number?" "I do. And I have a proposal. They're calling me back in 1 hour. I propose we use that time to trace the call. I can keep them on the line. I can be your bait." Another, longer silence. "Sir, that's not standard procedure. Our cyber unit is backlogged, and these calls are usually routed through VoIP systems. They're very hard to trace." "Officer Dunn," I interrupted. My tone, the one I used to use on junior engineers who presented me with excuses instead of solutions. "My name is Arthur Pembroke. I am a retired senior project engineer from Aerodyne Systems. For 30 years, my job was to solve problems that hadn't been solved before. This is a system, and it has vulnerabilities. They think I am one. I am not. I am a point of failure in their system. Let's exploit it. Please patch me through to whoever is in charge of your financial crimes or cyber unit now." The authority in my voice, the complete lack of the frailty I had feigned for the scammers, must have been convincing. There was a muffled sound as she put her hand over the receiver. Then the hold music, a tinny rendition of some pop song, began to play. It took 10 minutes. 10 minutes of my hour. Finally, a new voice came on the line. It was a man's voice, calm, focused, and devoid of patronization. "Mr. Pembroke, this is Detective Inspector Mark Rojas, Financial Crimes. I understand you've had an interesting morning." "I have, Inspector," I said, "and I believe we have a narrow window of opportunity. Are you prepared to take notes?" I gave him everything: the number, the bank details, the names Sergeant Miller and the fake grandson. I could hear the scratch of his pen, the intense focus on the other end of the line. "This is good, Mr. Pembroke, very good. We'll get this to the bank, see if we can freeze the account. But it's likely a mule account, emptied within minutes. The trace, it's a long shot. They use spoofers, bounce the signal all over." "Then we need them on the line for as long as possible," I said. "I can do that. I can play the confused, technologically illiterate old man. It's a role I have some personal experience with." He chuckled, a dry, appreciative sound. "It's a risk. They might get suspicious." "They're predators," I replied, looking out the garage window at my bird feeder where a cardinal was pecking at sunflower seeds. "They're looking for easy prey. They'll attribute any slowness to senility, not strategy. They are arrogant. That is their vulnerability." Rojas was silent for a moment. "All right, Mr. Pembroke, we'll set up a trace. When they call back, you answer. Keep them talking. We need a minimum of 20 minutes, preferably more. I'll be listening in on the line. If you feel unsafe, if they threaten you, you say the word Mabel. That's my grandmother's name. We'll abort. Understood?" "Understood," I said. The coal of anger in my gut was now a cool, focused flame. The project was underway. The next 50 minutes were the longest of my life. I didn't go to the bank. I stayed in the garage. I paced the worn concrete floor, my cane tapping a rhythm of anticipation. I rehearsed my lines. Not what I would say, but how I would say it. The right amount of tremor,
the perfect note of bewildered devotion. I was an engineer designing a persona, a tool to achieve a specific function, to keep a criminal on the phone for as long as it took to burn his house down. When the phone rang again, right on schedule, I let it chirp 3 times. I took a deep breath, settled into the role, and answered. "Hello?" I croaked. "Mr. Pembroke, it's Surgeon Miller. Were you able to get to the bank?" And so the dance began. "The bank?" I said, letting my voice drift into a confused murmur. "Oh, yes, the bank. I went, but there was a problem."
A sharp, frustrated exhale on the other end. I could almost see him, this Sergeant Miller, in some dim, rented room. A bank of phones on a cheap desk, the air thick with the smell of fast food and desperation. I was an outlier, a deviation from his efficient script. He didn't like it. "What kind of problem, sir? Your grandson is waiting." "Well," I began, settling onto my stool and adopting a leisurely pace. "First, the line was terribly long. You'd think on a Tuesday. Anyway, then when I finally got to the teller, a nice young woman, but she had the most peculiar color in her hair, a sort of lavender. I gave her the paper with the numbers. She looked at it and said she needed more information. She said it wasn't a court account. She said it looked like a personal account." I let the sentence hang, a hook baited with senile incompetence. The man on the other end was silent for a beat too long. I'd flustered him. That's incorrect, sir. It's a dedicated holding account for the municipal court. The teller must be new. You need to tell her it's for a wire transfer to the county sheriff's bail fund." I did, I insisted, injecting a note of feeble defiance. "I told her just that, but she said the name on the account, when she looked it up, was something else. It wasn't county sheriff at all. It was some other name. Let me see. I wrote it down. Dillon's Auto Detailing? Does that sound right?" I was flying blind, inventing a name, pushing to see how much pressure the system could take. The sheer, brazen stupidity of using a name so clearly unrelated to law enforcement was a calculated risk on my part. It made my character seem both observant and profoundly clueless. That's incorrect, sir." Miller's voice lost its professional sheen, sharpening with anger. "The teller must be new. You need to go back and tell her to ignore the name and just process the wire transfer." "Go back?" I wheezed, laying it on thick. "Oh my, it took me nearly an hour to get there and back. My hip, you know. And my car? The battery has been giving me trouble. I'm not sure it will start again. Maybe I should call my son. He could help." This was the crucial test. The threat of involving another, potentially more savvy family member. "No!" The word was a gunshot. He recovered quickly, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial, reassuring tone. "Sir, we strongly advise against that. Your grandson was very specific. He's terrified of his father's reaction. He begged us to keep this between us. Involving his dad could make this whole situation much, much worse for him. We don't want a family blow-up, do we?" The manipulation was so transparent, so vile. They isolate you. They make you the sole guardian of a terrible secret, leveraging your desire to protect your grandchild from further distress. It was psychological warfare of the most cowardly kind.
"Oh, no, we don't want that," I agreed hastily. "Daniel has always been so sensitive." There was the briefest of pauses. He'd forgotten the fake grandson's name. "Right, Daniel. He's counting on you, Grandpa." The use of the familial title coming from his mouth felt like a violation. It stoked the fire inside me. I needed to drag this out, to give Rojas and his team every second I could. "All right," I said, sighing with theatrical resignation. "I'll try to go back. But this wire business, I'm not good with these newfangled things. In my day, you wrote a check. Can you explain it to me again, slowly? I have a pen." I could hear his teeth grinding through the phone. "Sir, we've been over this. You just give the numbers to the teller. She types them into the computer. The money moves. It's simple." "But how does the money get there?" I pressed, adopting the earnest, ponderous tone of a man trying to understand nuclear physics. "Is it through the internet? I don't trust the internet. My neighbor's cousin had his identity stolen on the internet. Is it safe?"
For the next 20 minutes, I took him on a winding, nonsensical journey through the history of financial transactions. I asked about the differences between a wire and a transfer. I wondered aloud if the money traveled as electrons or as little digital packages. I segued into a story about my first paycheck, paid in cash in a brown envelope, and how much simpler things were then. I asked if the bank had to use a special kind of computer for wires, perhaps one with more buttons. He responded with monosyllabic answers, his patience fraying into a thin, brittle wire. "Yes. No. That's not how it works. Just give them the numbers." I was sweating. The performance was exhausting, a constant battle between my racing analytical mind and the doddering persona I was projecting. I kept one eye on the old regulator clock on the wall. 15 minutes. 17. "Come on, Rojas." "And another thing," I barreled on, "the young lady at the bank said something about a fee, a wire transfer fee. Is that included in the $4,000? Because I only have $4,000 in that account. It's for my property taxes. If there's a fee, I'll have to transfer from my savings, and that's at a different bank, across town." I was inventing obstacles now, building a labyrinth of geriatric financial confusion for him to navigate. His breathing was heavy, ragged. I was wasting his time. Time was money in his business. Every minute he spent on the line with me was a minute he wasn't scamming a more vulnerable, more believable target. "Forget the fee," he finally snapped, his voice shedding the last vestiges of its sergeant persona. "We'll cover the damn fee. Just go to the bank and send the money." "You'll cover it?" I said, feigning amazement. "Well, that's very generous of the sheriff's department. I'll have to write a letter to your supervisor commending you for your excellent service."
That seemed to break him. There was a string of muffled curses, the sound of a hand slamming on a desk. Then a new voice came on the line, younger, colder, with a sharp urban accent that clashed with the rural county sheriff pretense. "Old man, listen to me," the new voice hissed. "Stop fucking around. You have the numbers. Your grandson is sitting in a cell, scared. Do you want him to spend the night in jail? Do you want him to get hurt? These aren't nice people in here. You send the money now, or things will get bad for him. You understand me?" The shift was jarring. The mask was off. The threat was now explicit, ugly. The fear I felt was no longer an act, but it was a clean, sharp fear. The fear of a predator realizing its prey has teeth. This was no longer a scam. It was a robbery. And in that moment, a tiny green light on my phone, a feature I'd forgotten about, lit up. A second line was active. Rojas was listening. He had what he needed.
My own voice changed. The tremor vanished. The confusion evaporated. It was my engineering voice, the one I used in a crisis when a system was failing and lives were on the line. Calm, flat, and absolute. "Things are already bad for you," I said, each word a block of ice. "The call has been traced. The account has been flagged. The financial crimes unit of the police department has been listening to this entire pathetic conversation. I'd suggest you start thinking about your own bail money." The silence on the other end was profound. It was the silence of a vacuum, of a world collapsing in on itself. There was no slammed phone, no screamed curse, just a soft, dead click. Then the line was filled with the calm, professional voice of Detective Rojas. "Mr. Pembroke, you can stop now. We got it. We got everything." That was 38 minutes. That was exceptional. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My hands were trembling for real now, a cascade of released tension. I leaned against the workbench, the cool wood a grounding force. "Did it work?" I asked, my voice returning to its normal, aged rasp. "The trace was successful. They're in a commercial unit on the south side of the city. We have units moving in now. The bank has frozen the account. You did it, Arthur. You really did it." I looked at the nesting box, half finished on my bench. A small, pointless project. But this project today, hadn't been pointless at all. The anger was gone, replaced by a profound, bone-deep exhaustion, and the first faint flicker of satisfaction. "Good," I said. "Then my work here is done." But it wasn't. Not quite. The days that followed were a strange interlude. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a residue of quiet vigilance. Every ring of the phone was a potential aftershock. I found myself watching the news more intently, scanning the local channels for any mention of a bust. There was nothing. The world, it seemed, had absorbed my little drama and moved on. I returned to my seedlings, to the nesting box. I sanded the edges of the cherry wood until they were smooth as silk, the rhythmic motion a meditation. But my mind was elsewhere, running over the conversation, the voices, the threats. I thought of Herbert and the shame in his eyes when he'd confessed to being duped. I wasn't ashamed. I was furious still. The satisfaction I'd felt was a thin crust over a deep, hot lake of rage. This wasn't just about me. It was about all the Herberts, all the quiet, trusting people who were being systematically preyed upon.
A week to the day after the call, my phone chirped again. This time, it was Detective Rojas. "Mr. Pembroke," he began, and I could hear a different energy in his voice, a kind of weary triumph. "I have an update for you. I thought you'd want to hear it." I settled into my favorite armchair, the one that had molded itself to the contours of my body over 20 years. "I'm listening." "The raid was successful. We took down 3 individuals operating out of a rented office space. They had 12 computers, 40 burners, prepaid phones, and a sophisticated VoIP system that bounced their calls through servers in 6 countries. I nodded to myself. A system, just as I'd thought. "But that's not the big news," Rojas continued. "The data we recovered from their machines, it's a gold mine. We've identified over 200 victims across 3 states, most of them elderly, just like we thought. They'd been pulling this scam and several others for the better part of 2 years. The number hit me like a physical blow. 200. 200 families whose peace was shattered, whose savings had been stolen, whose trust had been broken. The hot lake of rage inside me simmered. "We've made several arrests," Rojas said, "and with the evidence, including the recording of your call, the DA is confident about convictions. These aren't just low-level punks. We got the organizers." I closed my eyes. Organizers. Men who sat in an office and managed the destruction of lives as if it were a balance sheet. They were worse than the voice on the phone. They were the architects. "There's one more thing," Rojas said, his tone shifting, becoming almost hesitant. "Their arraignment is tomorrow morning. It's a procedural hearing. They'll be formally charged and enter a plea. Given your role in this, we thought you might like to be present to see the faces of the men you helped put away."
The offer hung in the air. Did I want to see them? To give them a face? To make them real? Part of me wanted to leave them as faceless voices, abstract monsters to be despised from a distance. But a larger, darker part of me needed closure. I needed to see the karmic pendulum swing. I needed to see the trap spring shut. "I'll be there," I said. The courthouse was a temple of muted noise and polished floors. The air smelled of lemon-scented disinfectant and anxiety. I wore my best suit, the one I reserved for funerals, and leaned on my polished oak cane. I wasn't playing a role now. The tremble in my legs was genuine. The cavernous room with its high ceilings and stern-faced judge was designed to intimidate, and it was working on me, just as it was designed to. I found a seat in the back row of the public gallery. A few reporters lounged in the front, bored. A handful of lawyers milled about, their postures a language of casual power. I was just another old man, invisible. Then a side door opened, and they were brought in. 3 of them, shackled at the wrists and ankles, dressed in bright orange jumpsuits that screamed their status to the world. The 2 younger ones were the voices. I was sure of it. One was lanky, with a sullen, defeated posture, his eyes fixed on the floor. The other was heavier, with a brutish neck and a face that was a permanent sneer. He was the one who had made the final explicit threat. I felt a fresh wave of cold anger looking at him, but it was the older man who held my attention. He was older, in his 50s, with a carefully trimmed beard and wire-rimmed glasses. He looked punchy, soft-looking, like a mid-level accountant or a high school vice principal. This was the organizer, the architect. He didn't look like a monster. He looked ordinary. That was the most terrifying thing of all. The proceedings began, a dry river of legal jargon, charges, statutes, rights. I barely listened. My focus was on the older man. He stood calmly, his hands clasped in front of him, occasionally nodding as his lawyer whispered to him. He was treating this as a business inconvenience. There was no remorse in his posture, only a calculated assessment of his situation.
As the judge spoke, the older man's eyes, restless, scanned the gallery. They passed over the reporters, over the other bored spectators, and then they landed on me. For a moment, there was no recognition. I was just another old fossil taking up space. Then something shifted. Perhaps it was the way I was looking at him, not with the vague curiosity of the others, but with a direct,
unwavering focus. Perhaps it was some subconscious connection, the voice on the phone finally finding its source. I saw the moment of understanding dawn in his eyes. A slight narrowing, a tiny, almost imperceptible tightening of the lips. He knew. He knew who I was. This was the climax. Not a dramatic shout, not a physical confrontation. It was this silent, electric moment of recognition across a crowded, impersonal room. It was the predator seeing the trap and understanding that the bait had been conscious all along. The judge finished speaking. The hearing was over. The three men were turned to be led back out. As the older man shuffled past, his shackles clinking a soft metallic rhythm, he looked at me one last time. And I gave him what he expected from a frail old man. I smiled. It wasn't a smile of triumph, not a gloating grin. It was a small, cold, knowing smile. The smile of an engineer who has watched his machine perform its function perfectly. Then, slowly, deliberately, I reached up and tipped the brim of my hat. His face, so carefully composed, fractured. A flash of pure, undiluted hatred contorted his features before his lawyer tugged on his arm, pulling him away through the door, back to the world of concrete and steel that now awaited him.
The satisfaction that washed over me then was not hot or fiery. It was deep, quiet, and absolute. It was the feeling of a balance being restored, not just for me, but for Herbert and for the 200 other invisible victims. Justice wasn't an abstract concept, it was a system, and today it had worked. I stood up, my joints protesting, and made my way out of the courthouse. The sun was bright outside, warming my old bones. The cardinal was back at the feeder when I got home, a splash of brilliant red against the green of the yard. I walked into my garage, to the bench where the numbers were still faintly visible in grease pencil. I picked up a rag, dipped it in solvent, and wiped them away. The surface was clean. I picked up my nesting box. The project was no longer pointless. It was a promise of life, of continuity, of small, good things built by hand in a world that often seemed determined to break them. I had used the sharpest tool I had, my mind, to fix a small, broken piece of the world. And for today, that was enough. What does true justice look like to you when the system fails and you have to become the architect of your own reckoning?